Brilliant. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the fourth event of the Green Book Fair happening online. It's great to have you all. We wanted to do something a little bit different with this particular section. We wanted to look at how to sell rights as a publisher to book and from book to TV and film, which is sometimes not that transparent a process. And we hope that this will demystify that for you. And we have two very accomplished panelists from both sides of that discussion who are going to offer their expertise today. I'm going to get them to explain a little bit about them, but we have Kevin Duffy from Bluemoose Books, which is a fantastic publisher based in Hebden Bridge, if you don't already know them, but with a very international reach. And Kevin's going to tell us a little bit about that and how they've developed their rights selling of their books into film and TV. And then we have Mark from Vestapol Films and Chase Films, which again is based in the UK, however, also has international reach and international languages as well. So we'll hear a lot about how stories can travel and how we reach international markets and how we do that as a publisher. So I will let Kevin introduce himself first, and then we'll come to Mark and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, my name's Kevin Duffy, and I'm from Bluemoose Books. We're based in Hebden Bridge, as Isabel said. We started in 2006 and we publish literary fiction. Prior to that, I'd worked with several of the corporate publishers in London, but moved back up into the north in the mid-90s. So we publish literary fiction, and at present we have two books in film production, which is which is Leonard and Hungry Paul by Ronan Hession, which we published in 2019, and also Should We Fall Behind by Sharon Dougal, which we published in 2022. And we've just sold a book, which I'm not allowed to talk about, to a big Hollywood film company, one of the big four, but there'll be an announcement in the next 4 weeks. So that's who we are, but we publish literary fiction, as I say. I'll talk about how we get our books pitched to the film industry later, but if that's kind of Bluemoose and who we are. If I just say, and this is me slapping myself on the back, that The Guardian said that we are a small, beautiful literary fiction hit factory. But yeah, we publish 6 books a year, and it's all literary fiction, and it's all about the story, which I'll talk about later on. And our books have been translated into 17 different languages, and our books are sold all around the world. So yeah, that's Bluemoose Books from the heart of Hebden.
Cheers, Kevin. Really interesting. Thank you. And hand over to Mark. Tell us all about Vestapol and Chase.
Hi, my name's Mark Gill. I'm a writer, director, and producer. I have a company in Manchester, Chase Films, which is primarily commercial and brand film production. But I have another company in France called Vestapol Films. We've just produced our first feature, which is a true life story of a Japanese photographer called Masahisa Fukasi. It's called Ravens, and it just world premiered at Austin Film Festival 2 weeks ago, where we won the Marquee Film Audience Award. And then I went straight from there to Tokyo for Asian premiere. And so the background with Vestapol is that we do look for titles and properties to adapt with an international reach. Even though I'm based in the UK and France and Tokyo, mostly the work that we've done on acquiring rights has been through Vestapol. So we have one book we've already optioned. And then I have another book that I'm in the process of negotiating a deal with a Japanese publisher, which is a whole different kind of headache than working with UK publishers. And I suppose what I can talk about from a personal perspective is probably how to approach production companies or directly filmmakers and what I think they might be looking for, because that comes down to each person's individual taste, house style, genre, and yeah, international audience has become more important with the advent of streaming. And there's a real difference between TV and film in terms of development and funding.
Cheers, Mark. That's really interesting. And already, even before the questions have begun, you're already having a kind of mutual language about having an international story. You know, will it travel? Will it, at its heart, translate to readers all around the world? Which is really interesting to note. So, Mark, this might be different for, as you say, for TV and film, or just for different production companies. But how best do you at Vestapol like to be approached with a film pitch? If a publisher is coming to you, what would you like to see in that? How would you like that approach to work?
I think what I'd hope is that they've done some research into what the company's about. I think that's the really important thing, because there's no point coming to us with a horror novel, for example, even though we have had, I say that, I mean, the option book we've optioned is a vampire novel, but it's a very different kind. It's an out of print French Canadian vampire novel from 30, 40 years ago, that we actually found it. Well, I suppose what you do is, whether it's us or somebody else, is actually do some research into the companies, because there are certain production companies that will specialize in horror. There'll be those who specialize in drama, etc., etc. And I think that'd be the first bit of advice: is do the research into who you're approaching. I guess the other thing would probably, because we're only a small company. Bigger companies might have readers who've got time to read the novels. I suppose a one-page pitch about the book. It's the same with scripts. It's when you're sending scripts to executives, they get them all the time. They can get like 30 or 40 scripts a week. But what's it going to be that makes you pick up that script? And usually it's a good one-pager. A lot of people know what they're looking for as well. So I think the first point is do as much research into the people in the companies, what their backgrounds, and then a simple one-pager is, because it's not, you can just read it and go, okay, that's for me, it's not for me, very quickly, rather than go, I'm going to tackle a 120-page script or a novel. I think that's the way I'd like it, but I'm only speaking from a personal perspective.
And in that one page, Mark, is it more like a pitch that you would see to an agent, or is it more like a synopsis, or both?
Both, I think. Yeah, I think, and the back, you're interested to see if the publishers have managed to sell works before. It's like Kevin's got stuff off the ground, so they've got a track record of dealing with this as well, because the rights issues can be complex. So yeah, the short and sweet, and it's just because people are really like, I'm stacked out with loads of other projects all the time, but your radar should always be attuned to new projects. Definitely.
Yeah, it's great to know you're actively searching for them as well, Mark, when you have time, So Kevin, what have you learned personally makes a good film pitch for a book? Obviously, I'm sure you've done a lot and you've developed relationships over the years, and perhaps have learned some things that were good or bad, and now you've got sort of perfected techniques that perhaps you might be able to share wisdom on.
I wouldn't say it's perfected technique. I think there's cognitive dissonance where, when we're kind of publishing a book, I don't even think about a film. We just, there's four of us, and if we just fall in love with the story, that's the most important thing, and we publish it, and that's what we've been doing since 2006. So as a publisher, the most important thing for us is to have a story, and sometimes those stories have an international reach. Sometimes those stories are quite small, like Lenin and Hungry Paul. But we've got, once we've published, and because we've, over the last 5 years, we've been shortlisted or won 24 major literary prizes. So we do have some presence, and people do know what we do, and they like what we do. So there's a three-pronged approach. We have literary scouts approaching us for books that they, and it's all about the IP for them. Perhaps Mark can talk about like the intellectual property. It is everything to kind of film and TV. So we have literary scouts that we send books to and contact us. But we also have independent film companies and directors who've read our book and then contact us. But the most important relationship that we've had is with a company called The Agency in London. And they've got offices in Los Angeles and London. And Tanya Tillett looks after all our books. But I don't send her all our books. I only send her those titles that I think have some relevance, that she can then pitch to, or the streaming services, the film services, etc. But as like Mark says, it's different to independence and TV. because Leonard and Hungry Paul is being funded by Creative Ireland and also kind of BBC Northern Ireland, different pots of money going in there. Whereas other books we have, it's the independent film companies are putting the money up front. But that relationship with Tanya is kind of imperative, because I know I ask her, twice a year what the streamers are looking for, what TV companies are looking for, because she's meeting them all the time. And again, all the time they're asking for kind of stories that have, and it's such a kind of bland answer, but they just want stories that can connect with TV or film people. And that can be, books that we published 12 years ago, book that we've just sold to Hollywood. We published in 2012. But they're desperate for content, but it's just getting the right stories to them. But it is, as Mark will know, it's a glacial process. We've been in talks with companies up 3-4 years, and still nothing's happened. Fortunately, with Leonard and Hungry Paul and Should We Fall Behind, they're actually in production, but that, it takes years. So when you say, do we think about a book would become a film? You can't really think about that when you're publishing it, because you've got to get the story out there to readers first, and then it will make its mark. And if it does win prizes or get shortlisted again, it raises its profile. But we can't think about, when I've read a particular manuscript, I think, oh, that'll make a great film. But that doesn't dictate whether we publish it or not, because you can't rely on film money 10 years down the line or 4 years down the line, because it may never be greenlit, and you're just optioning books. But what we've found, and specifically since COVID, people more, they want stories. They just want stories that connect with them. And I have a coffee every morning with a writer who writes for TV and film in Sky Atlantic, and I'm always asking him, what do the film people want? And he said it's all about the IP, because film companies, Mark may say different, but what I'm being told by film companies and independent producers and directors is that they won't make something from an idea. They want something that's been established already in one of the creative markets, say a book or something like that, that gives them something that they can then hook it onto when they're pitching for money to the money men, or like the Gallows Pole, which the BBC Two last year was a 3-part series. It won the Walter Scott Prize, and Ben has become a kind of international best-selling author. So it's things like that you can add on to a brilliant story that can kind of attract the eyes or the bean counters to kind of put some money behind it. But it is a long process. It is a long process.
Yeah, we were hearing this earlier in the translation panel that once funding bodies are involved, it takes a very long time. You have to be very patient. So I can see why you can't forward plan for something to become a book, or just start planning the pitch at the same time as you're planning what the book's reception is going to be. But it does seem, from what you're saying, Kevin, that it's really important to focus on the profile of the book, nationally, internationally, prizes, PR, because otherwise, why would film companies invest in you? Needs to have some kind of proven strategy behind it, which is, all a journey. If there are any small publishers on this chat that are thinking, I'm on a lower part of that journey, we've all been there, and this seems like a case of relationship building.
Yeah, I mean, if I just go back to Leonard and Hungry Paul, it's now become a bestseller in Germany, selling over like 250,000 copies. So again, that international hook. But when we published it in 2019, you don't know how it's going to travel. But it just gives you more weight when you are pitching it to the film or TV industry.
So when we talk about the right kind of story for film, Mark, what kind of factors play into the acquisition of a book for screen adaptation, and what practically makes a book less possible for adaptation?
Well, budget's always the key thing. It's interesting what Kevin, because I'm actually repped at the agency, so I know who you're talking about.
All right.
That's my agent. So yeah. I got given a book by an author called James Smythe about 7 years ago. So my agent had a relationship, probably it probably came through the lady at the agency who looks after probably a number of publishers, has relationships with publishers to get copies of books that, because sometimes the book industry knows when something's going to be a good seller, and that book deal was probably done before the book's out. If it's a major author, the deals are done. So I'm good friends with David Mitchell, the author. We ran a TV show together. David's books are more often not optioned before they're finished being written, for example. So the one I was sent was an example of my agent knows what I like, the type of work that I like as a writer director, and the type of thing I'm looking to adapt. So where I was concerned, I just got sent the book to read and I loved it. And then I was approached by another production company who liked my first film and asked me what I was doing next. And I said, oh, I've just optioned this book. And then the chain of title went from me to them and it was developed. But it again, Kevin said, there's no guarantees. I mean, the option was done quite quickly on that because I'm with the agency, James was with the agency. The people we knew who wanted the book were reputable. So there was no major snags in, and this was a time when they were offering decent money to develop the books, because it can take some time to get the actual book development. So the option period, I think we've got about 2 to 3 years in total. But it went into turnaround because it was just there's no guarantees it's going to get greenlit. The market changes all the time. What people are looking for changes all the time. So in terms of TV, yeah, properties, they want the IP because it's both a high risk and a low risk industry at the same time. It's high risk in terms of the amount of money that gets thrown at things, and there's no guarantees investors get that back, especially in film. TV, it's less of a risk, I guess, but it's also low risk in that the people don't want to take it's their jobs on the line if they get it wrong. So that's why they like IP, because there's a proven audience there. Even if it's a small book, it's something that they can. It's all about the market and the strategy. I hate to say it, it's all about how can they get this. You know, it's based on a novel. The novel is like a secondary support to the film. Again, it's like vice versa. So when David wrote Cloud Atlas, it was a massive, massive success as a novel, and then it took a long time for it to become a movie. And I imagine when the movie come out, that introduced people who didn't know there was a novel about it. So in terms of film development right now in the UK in particular, I mean, to get my last movie made, even though it's not a novel adaptation, it was based on a real person. There are about now 10 books of his in publication. So there is kind of IP out there, and his reputation, from when I discovered, his reputation has grown. So that kind of helped. But I had to leave the UK to raise the money for development because we've come off the back of COVID, we've come off the back of 14 years of underinvestment in the arts, as everybody knows. But what I'm seeing now is that there might be a bit more of a change in independent film, because they've reintroduced the tax breaks. Whether they're going to introduce the reinvestment schemes, the SEIS, EIS investment schemes, all those things are important, because paying for an option on a book is like, it's small change really. The development of it can be 6 figures, and that's the highest risk money, because if the book doesn't get green lit, that money's never recouped. So that's why IP is probably the most important thing, because they can. I mean, I think I have my own opinions on that, but I think I love book adaptations, but I think original voices are just as important. You know what I mean? And so, does that answer the question? I don't quite remember what the question was. I sort of
Yes. In terms of we were talking about practical. I guess you just said about budget. If your budget is not practically big enough to cover, say, a fantasy novel,
that's what I mean about when you approach. If you've got a fantasy novel, don't approach a small independent.
Yeah.
Unless they've got a proven track record, and if you can work out that those production companies have relationships with capital investment companies, particularly film investment companies, which again, there aren't that many in the UK right now, because there just hasn't been the tax breaks, which this is how they raise their money from the high net worth individuals. So going to studios, TV streamers, with an IP is great. And I can't think what else to say about that in particular.
No, I think that's really useful. Cheers, Mark. Kevin, you were saying to me not all of your books are suitable for adaptation, and so you only send a couple to the agency and your agent. So how do you know which books to send her?
$64,000 question, isn't it? Just a sense of where the story's going in each individual book, and what kind of, and again, it's a kind of an obvious answer, I think, but the trials and tribulations of the main character or the characters around that, and kind of sometimes when you're reading a book visually in your head whilst you're reading, you can see it in episodic film bit, and I think it's those stories that I think personally will have the best chance. I send Tanya the whole list of what we're publishing the next year, and then I highlight the ones that I think might have the best chances of getting some kind of resonance from film or TV. And I won't say it's hit and miss, because it isn't, but you just get a sense of those stories that have got a better chance, because they have Should We Fall Behind is set in London, but it has a universal core to it in the fact there's a young guy who's living in a broken down car in someone's back garden, and he's helped by 4 different neighbours, but they come from 4 different parts of the world.
And we lost Kevin. Wasn't
In
sure
the
if it was
covers
me or not.
series, and yeah, that's in production now. So you get a sense of what you think will work and what you don't think will work. Whereas again, the book that's been picked up by kind of the Hollywood stable is kind of a dystopian thriller. But I never thought it was a dystopian thriller. I just read it as literary fiction. But then the science fiction community have picked up in it, and it's just gone. It was published in America about 3 years ago, and I think that's why it's now been optioned. Again, but it's like Mark was saying, it's a big story. There's some big scenes in there, so that's why one of the majors has picked up on it, because it would cost too much for an independent to film it.
It's great that you
but
can
you get
picture
a sense
episodes in
of
your head, Kevin.
Sorry?
It's great that you can picture episodes and chapters in your head in
Yeah,
a filmic way.
It's a kind of, I'm going to sound like Danny LaRue now. Your guests probably won't know who that is, but when you've been doing something for quite a long time, you just get a sense of something that works, or you hope will work.
Just takes practice and a bit of intuition.
I think also genre is really important. I think there's like the streamers are always looking for young adult. From my experience, they're desperate for young adult stuff. Sci-fi is always good, but it costs a little bit more unless it's something that's a bit more grounded. Horror always sells in film. It's like horror movies are usually like one location, like a cabin in the woods, or The Ritual, which is set in a forest. The one location, it's 4 stupid characters usually, and so those films are quite profitable. But you know what I mean, that's good. So anything folk horror is again, it's a growing market. I know we've discussed it before, but I also think, as well as the universality of the story, I think also if the story is very specifically about one thing, I think that's equally as important. I think there's too much, for me, for my opinion, there's too much trying to make something that it's like a Goldilocks, pleases everybody. Well, the world ain't like that. And I think sometimes the most unique stories are the ones that can surprise you. If you think about a film like Moonlight, I'm not sure whether it was a book adaptation or not. That film reached a massive audience, but it's about a very specific group of people, and I think that can equally work as well as sort of the universal stories. And you just never know what it's going to be. It's like we're negotiating an option now on a Japanese novel, which is a whole world of pain, trying to negotiate with Japanese especially one of the big publishers, because they're so used to just selling manga to Netflix. They think any international producer comes with a massive checkbook. So we're having to sort of gently educate them on the ways of independent film production, where the option fees are smaller, but the execution price is bigger. That tends to be in the West. In Japan, it tends to be the option price is bigger, but the execution price is small. And like you say, you just never know. And like Kevin, when I'm reading, I'm seeing pictures. I've always have done since I was a kid. So if I'm seeing something that feels like a movie, and some novels are written like that. This particular one I'm optioning now it felt very cinematically written. It felt like it was doing the gear changes at the right moments that a movie would do the gear changes. There's a problem with a bit of the structure and of some of the stories, but that's where the adaptation process is key in film. And I think any authors have to be prepared for that. They also, Kevin, you probably give the authors all get meaningful consultation with the filmmakers, but you have to be prepared that your book might get absolutely decimated by a filmmaker to make a good movie. Because it's if you've ever seen the film LA Confidential and read the book LA Confidential, the adaptation of that is astonishing. How they took this mammoth book and just focused on 3 characters in 2 hours. It was a brilliant adaptation. The book is better, but you couldn't turn that book into a movie. They had to do that. So I think it's always being prepared to manage authors through that process, because it can be quite brutal.
So this
That's
acquisition.
that's the literal payoff, though, isn't it? The author get compensated for their idea, and then because it's a completely different platform, isn't it? And I think sometimes authors don't understand that, and they want to write the film or the TV and I have to say, no, that's not your skill set, because it's a completely different skill set to write TV and film. And right between TV and film, it's different. But some writers get quite upset that, well, this is mine, and thinking, but your writing skill is in kind of the novel form, not in the kind of screen form. And it is completely different, and you will ruin your book. And you'll get even more. Yeah.
So for you, Kevin, then the authors, you advise them not to be involved because, as you say, that's not their skill set. It will be managed professionally by a screenwriter from that company, and you sort of play a little bit of an agent's role there in informing them what's going on, but with a sort of emotional distance.
But invariably, and this is usually as a way of consoling the writer, the production company will bring on the writer as a consultant, but not in a writing aspect, just a kind of ideas and, is this okay kind of thing, or not that is this okay, because they're still probably going to go ahead with what they're going to do, but just to kind of, and then they'll pay them a small fee to do that, or whatever, how big the production is. But yeah, they're involved, but they're not involved in the kind of the daily making of the film. But I'll have talked to them beforehand about that, and Tanya will as well. And she's really good at kind of laying the groundwork of what actually happens, and then they're fully aware of their role or non-role within the production of the film or the TV series.
That's a good thing as well, is if you find someone has interest in your novel, get the writer to meet the person who's going to write quite quickly, because I think if they can connect as people, it makes because the screenwriter wants to they want to ask questions of the writer. They want to know what they were thinking when they were doing things. And I think that can almost, when I did the first book option I ever did, it was between me and HBO, and he went with me. That's the fool, because he just liked what I was going to do with his novel compared to what someone else was going to do with it. So I think introducing your writers quite early in the process, just to say, these are the people who are going to do it. What do we think? You want to feel like it's in good hands, that they get it. I think that's important.
On the back of that, which is really important, is that Renan Hession a week today is meeting a director, a producer, and a scriptwriter for Ghost Mountain in Dublin. Before, and they want to tell him what they would like to do with it. And again, like Mark says, ask questions and delve a bit deeper. They've already kind of pitched to him with a kind of document what they'd like to do, but they want to meet up with him and he wants to meet them. And that relationship, excuse me, that's the done. That relationship is imperative. Can you go over to Mark and I'll answer the floor? Excuse me.
It sounds like this relationship is based on a lot of trust. We were talking earlier in the translation panel about the relationship between a translator and a writer, and how sometimes they'll sort of marry for life, if you like, and translate the whole
Can we get around the other
life's
side?
work.
No. This way?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's I mean, it's like a novel is such, like, you put so much work into it, and so it's such a personal thing. You really do need to feel like you're going to hand it over to someone. I think also when you said before, what are we looking for in a pitch? I think you as publishers should always have, you know, what, like Kevin just said, the novel I've just acquired in Japan, he's not let anyone option it for 40 years. And I wasn't looking for that book. I just wanted something to read to take my mind off the hell of the post-production of my new movie, which is now thankfully out and doing great. And I was reading the book, and as I was reading everything, I was kind of falling in love with it. And then it's all set in Tokyo, but there's a club in it called the Manchester Club. I nearly dropped the book, and I thought, oh my God, this is like, and it's taken, like I say, it's taken that time. But what I had to do, and this is what I was saying before, is that I knew that I was going to go to a publisher and an author that's not allowed something to be optioned for such a long period of time. And I had one shot to get it right. Luckily, I had a Japanese language movie in my pocket to show them with a breakout star this year. As Asano Tadanobu out of Shogun is my lead actor. And so I had all this, but I went to them with a pitch to the publishers with an absolutely glossy pitch. So this is why I'm the guy to option this movie that you've never allowed to be optioned. And somehow I've pulled it off. But I think my pitch document to the publisher was just as important as anything you might send to producers and writers. You've got to be, are these the people I want to be doing business with? Especially in Japan, that's so cautious about everything, especially me as a gaijin, is like the minefield I have to walk through. But that document that I prepared and had translated into Japanese showed them what I wanted to do with the book, which was quite different. You know, this is a novel that's set 40 years ago where the female characters are quite frankly fantasy female characters, and we wanted to move it into the modern day. We wanted to update the story, we wanted to change all the characters. And so I think it's equally as important, as I was saying, for you guys to know that, see what they're offering, see if you share the vision that got you excited about the book in the first place.
Yeah, that's good to note, because you know, I imagine that if any small publisher got a film deal, they probably would instantly say yes, but they may not have done their research into this, because, as you say, you know, the writer is probably not going to be involved in the screenplay. There is a lot of trust along that journey. It's a very long journey, and all sides need to have trust and respect. And, you know, hopefully there'll be an outcome there that they're really happy about. But I think all sides need to have a joined up vision and thinking. We've got about 6 minutes left. We have a marketing literary fiction panel at 3. So I will open up for audience questions now. You can either pop them in the chat or raise your hand on Zoom if you'd prefer to answer on camera. While people are thinking about if they have any questions, I just wanted you to clarify, Mark, we were talking about the process of acquisition earlier. How long roughly is that? I feel like you said 3 to 5 years, but I'm sure it varies based on genre and budget and how you apply for funding and things like that.
You mean the option process, or the
process of the acquisition, yeah, and then what happens after that? So I guess from the signing to the end.
I mean, it can depend. I think the one we did with James was very fast because I'm an agency client and he's an agency client, and everyone was in the good space and wanted to get it done. The French novel didn't take too long, again, because we were the only people who were interested in it. It's just the legal stuff, lawyers, you know, how fast is the lawyer, basically, and how, you know, how complex is the chain of title and who owns the rights, especially if a book that's been out of print, it could have been picked up by another publisher, and did they acquire the chain of title from the original publishers and all those types of things. But that's, again, internationally, it can vary. Like the Japanese one, we're already into like month 5, and we've not even we're still talking about numbers. But we're putting the pressure on them now. But we've had to play the game of Japanese publishing and acquisition rights. Because the process is you ask the author, who then speaks to his editors, who then speaks to his publishers, and all of those three can have a different approach. And it might be the same if you're dealing with international production companies, for example, who come and get your book. They might be used to doing things a different way to the UK and US. UK and US is pretty fast, I must say, at everything. Further, because we've got the infrastructure, we're used to doing it. Whereas France was reasonably quick. I think it took about 3 or 4 months to get the option through. Then once you've got the option, you're looking at option periods initially 2 years, which can be broken down into two 12 months or an 18-month and a 6-month. You're get paid a fee for that, depending on and again, that really depends on, is it the cachet of the author. Then you've got a script, and then that's got to be budgeted and financed. So my recent film, I discovered the story in 2015. I acquired the rights in 2019 because I was making another movie. I got the development funding in the same year as 2019. I turned the script round in 2020, then COVID happened. But that was quite fast. So from script to screen, if you take out COVID, it only took 3 years. But if you think of, I'm good friends with producer Simon Egan, who was co-producer on The King's Speech. That guy had to wait until the Queen Mother died until he could do anything with that. And he approached her in 1980, thinking probably, she'll be dead in a few years. And she lived to 104. So he was like, so it can take anything from, the options will be the fastest part for sure. The development, most production companies will know within 2 years whether it's viable as a property to get funded. But then, even if people go, right, we want to make it, we're going to start the process, you've then got the whole, you're then into the film industry, which is all about casting. Because casting, getting the right names in your movie is what get it financed. So, just to align casts, availability can take forever. So I wouldn't, your option will be quick comparatively compared to the production, for sure.
I think we're all probably pleased that we're not directly involved with the production then.
No.
I have a quick question, probably for yourself, Mark, from Kiara, just before we end. So in terms of a director, the producer, the studio, how do they all interact? How are they linked in the process?
What, in the option process?
Yeah, so the process of film, but I'm assuming in terms of the acquisition of a book, would the director be involved in that, or would that just be producer and studio?
It can be. It's like Kevin said, like sometimes an author will read a book and approach the publisher directly or approach the writer directly, which is I've done that in the past. Maybe I've done that in the past. They have script book scouts. Bigger companies will have book scouts. They'll have relationships like Kevin does with the agency. So sometimes producers can acquire the book and they then look for a writer and a director to bring on. Sometimes a writer or a director can acquire the book and they bring in the producers. So there's no one size fits all, really. But the bigger up the food chain you go, when you get into the major studios, major independent producers, major agencies in the States, they'll have designated book people looking for properties and IP, because they want to own the rights, and then they'll attach their directors and the writers.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. That's really helpful. Well, it's been a pleasure learning about this and the ins and outs of funding and the different levels as well of the indie publishing and indie film world, and how that works on a larger scale as well. So I hope that has been helpful to everyone. I will circulate the recording afterwards for anyone who couldn't make the whole session. And do follow Vestapol Films and Chase Films and Bluemoose Books, and look forward to your announcement in 4 weeks, Kevin. Are you on mute? There you go. All right, brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. Oh, there you go.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.